It came in a manila envelope, stamped with the official seal of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the ink slightly faded from sun exposure. I held it in my hand like a detonator because, in a way, it was not a bomb, not a gun, but something far more precise, something that could erase decades of theft, betrayal, and arrogance with the quiet turn of a valve. I'd just returned from a 12-month deployment in the Horn of Africa. My boots still smelled like desert dust and diesel. My body ached from months of vigilance, my mind still tuned to the rhythms of war. Sleep in short bursts. Scan for threats. Never let your guard down. I wasn't supposed to be back yet. I was supposed to be on R&R in Germany, then redeployed for another 6 months. But when the call came, when I heard my father's voice crack over the satellite line, I requested emergency leave. The Army granted it. They knew about my situation. Some of the higher-ups had even heard of my family's land. I opened the envelope on the porch of my childhood home, the one that no longer stood. Inside was a single document, a certified copy of the original land deed from 1898, signed by my great-great-grandfather, Elias Macaulay. Attached were water rights permits issued by the federal government in 1912, renewed and reaffirmed through the decades. And finally, a map hand-drawn by the Corps in 1947 detailing the dam system built to control the flow of the Blackwater River, the structure I had inherited along with the land. The note at the bottom read, per federal law, the dam and all water rights remain under the sole control of the landowner of record. No transfer has been legally recognized. Exercise caution. The system is fully operational. I looked out over the valley, where my family's 300-acre ranch used to be, where my grandfather raised cattle, where my father taught me to fish, where I buried my dog when I was 10. There was now a manicured neighborhood of cookie-cutter mansions, white stucco, red tile roofs, SUVs in driveways, kids' bikes on lawns. A sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Whispering Pines, where luxury meets nature." And just beyond them, shimmering under the late afternoon sun, was the new lake, or rather, the flooded development. I smiled. I hadn't opened the dam yet, but I would, and I would watch. Chapter 1. The land, the Macaulay land, wasn't just property, it was legacy. My family had owned it since the late 1800s, when Elias Macaulay, Union veteran of the Civil War, was granted the acreage as part of a homesteading initiative. He'd walked from Pennsylvania with a rifle, a Bible, and 2 horses. He built the first cabin by hand, using logs from the surrounding pines. He dammed the Blackwater River to irrigate crops and power a small mill. Over the years, the land grew cattle, hay, timber. The Macaulays were never rich, but we were self-sufficient, proud. By the time my father, Thomas Macaulay, took over in the 1970s, the ranch was a modest success. We raised Angus cattle, grew corn and wheat, and leased parts of the northern ridge for hunting. We weren't developers. We weren't investors. We were stewards, and we had the water rights. That was the key in 1912. After a series of devastating floods wiped out downstream farms, the federal government stepped in. The Army Corps of Engineers built a dam on the upper Blackwater River to regulate flow, but they didn't seize the land. Instead, they entered into an agreement with the landowner Relis's son, James Macaulay, granting the Corps' engineering control, but leaving ownership and water rights with the family. The dam was a marvel of early 20th century engineering: concrete, steel gates, manual override systems, and a spillway designed to handle 10,000 cubic feet per second. It was maintained by the Corps, but operated under the authority of the landowner. Every 5 years, a Corps engineer would visit to inspect, test, and certify the system. We kept logs. We followed protocol. My father taught me how to read the water levels, how to adjust the sluice gates, how to calculate flow rates. This isn't just water. He'd say it's power. And power, son, is responsibility. I was 12 when I first opened a gate myself. My hands barely reached the wheel. It took all my strength to turn it. But when the water surged through, carving a new path downstream, I felt it in my bones, the hum of the earth, the pulse of the river, the weight of what we controlled. That dam was more than infrastructure. It was a symbol. And when I joined the Army at 21, I made sure the Corps knew I was next in line. I signed the paperwork. I underwent training. I was listed as the authorized operator. I thought that would be enough. I was wrong. Chapter 2. The deployment. I enlisted after 9/11s, not out of vengeance, but out of duty. My father had served in Vietnam. My uncle died in Kuwait. The military was in our blood. I became a combat engineer specializing in demolitions, structural assessment, and disaster response. I learned how to build bridges, clear minefields, and breach fortified walls. I also learned how to read terrain, predict weather patterns, and manage water systems in conflict zones. In Iraq, I helped rebuild irrigation canals destroyed by war. In Afghanistan, I designed flood barriers for villages near melting glaciers. I was good at my job, and I was gone a lot. The first deployment was 6 months, then another, then a third. By the time I was assigned to the Horn of Africa, I'd been overseas for nearly 4 years in the last 8. I called home every Sunday. My father always answered. Same voice, Same stories. Cattle's doing well. Rain's been light. The dam's quiet. But in the spring of 2022, the call stopped. I tried to call. No answer. I emailed the local sheriff. No response. I asked a buddy stationed in Germany to check on things. He drove to the property. What he sent me was a photo. It showed a construction site. Bulldozers, survey stakes, a sign, coming soon, Whispering Pines, luxury estates. I called my father's neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, an 82-year-old widow who'd lived across the ridge her whole life. They took it, she said, voice trembling. The HOA, the developers, they said your dad died, and since you were deployed, the land was unclaimed. They filed a quiet title action, said the deed was lost, said the water rights were abandoned. That's not true, I said. It doesn't. What's true? She said. They had lawyers. They had money, they had time. When did my father die? There was a long pause. He didn't, she said. He's in a care home in Boise. Stroke, can't talk, barely recognizes me. I felt the world tilt. They hadn't just stolen the land. They'd isolated my father. They'd used his illness. They'd exploited my absence. And they'd built $35 million homes on top of my family's legacy. Asterisk Chapter 3. The return. I requested emergency leave under the Family Medical Leave Act for military personnel. The Army granted it after verifying my father's condition. I flew commercial from Djibouti to Frankfurt, then to Seattle, then to Boise. My father was in a private care facility, small and clean, with soft lighting and the smell of lavender disinfectant. He was thin. His right side was paralyzed. His eyes, once sharp and blue, were clouded with age and stroke damage. But when he saw me, he tried to smile. I sat beside him, held his hand. I'm here, Dad, I said. I'm home. He blinked slowly. Then, with his left hand, he tapped his chest, then pointed toward the window, south, toward the valley. I knew what he meant. I kissed his forehead. I'll fix it. Chapter 4. The investigation. I drove to the county recorder's office the next day. The Whispering Pines development was real. Permits had been issued in 2021. The developer company called Horizon Communities had purchased the land from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, which had claimed ownership through adverse possession and quiet title. The paperwork was thick. Legal jargon, affidavits, survey maps. They claimed the Macaulay deed had been lost in a courthouse fire in 1983. They claimed no one had lived on or maintained the property for over 20 years. They claimed the water rights had been abandoned due to nan-use. All lies. I pulled the original deed from the state archives. It was digitized, but the physical copy still existed in a vault in Salem. I obtained a certified copy. I also found the water rights records in broken chain from 1912 to present. No abandonment, no transfer. And I found something else. The dam maintenance logs. The Corps had visited in 2020. The system was fully functional. The gates were operational. The control room was intact, but the access road to the dam had been blocked. A gate had been installed with a sign. Private property, no trespassing, Whispering Pines HOA. They didn't just steal the land. They tried to lock me out of my own dam. I filed a formal complaint with the Army Corps. I sent them the deed, the water rights, the logs. Their response came 3 weeks later. The dam remains under federal jurisdiction for structural safety, but operational control is legally vested in the landowner of record. As no legal transfer of ownership has been recognized by this office, you retain full authority over the dam and its systems. Trespassing on federal infrastructure is a felony. We recommend immediate reclamation of access. I printed the letter, folded it, put it in my pocket. Then I drove to the dam. Chapter 5. The dam. The Blackwater Dam stood like a sentinel. Built in 1947, it was a gravity dam, concrete, 120 feet high, 600 feet across. It held back the Blackwater Reservoir, a 1,200-acre lake that fed the river downstream. The control house was small, steel reinforced, with a manual override wheel, electrical controls, and a radio link to the cores. It was also armed, not with weapons, with consequences. The dam wasn't just a wall of concrete. It was a system. Spillways, emergency gates, sensors, alarms. If opened fully, it could release 15,000 cubic feet of water per second, enough to flood the entire valley in under 2 hours, and I had the keys. I arrived at dusk. The HOA gate was locked, chain and padlock. I didn't bother with it. I walked around, through the trees, using the old service trail my father and I used when I was a kid. The brush had grown thick, but the path was still there. I reached the control house. The door was sealed with a federal lock Corps issue. I pulled out the key I'd kept for 10 years. It turned inside. Everything was as I remembered. Dusty but functional. Gauges showed water level at 92%. Rain was forecast for the weekend, 2 inches expected. I sat at the control panel, flipped the power switch. Lights flickered on. I ran a diagnostic. All systems green. I was back in control, and they had no idea. Chapter 6. The HOA Whispering Pines was a monument to excess. 30-5 homes, all between 4,000 and 8,000 square feet. Granite countertops, infinity pools, home theaters, 3-car garages. Average price, $1.8 million. The HOA was run by a man named Richard Langstaner, real estate attorney from Portland who'd orchestrated the entire scheme. He'd formed the HOA, filed the quiet title action, hired surveyors to redraw boundaries, and convinced the county that the Macaulay land was abandoned. He even held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Photos online showed him smiling, cutting a red ribbon, surrounded by happy new homeowners. One caption read, "Finally, a community where nature meets luxury. Another lakefront living without the maintenance." They didn't know they were about to get real lakefront living. I started gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator, former MP named Carla Reyes. She dug into Langston's past, found shell companies, offshore accounts, a pattern of property grabs in rural areas. He'd done this before, in Montana, in New Mexico, always targeting absentee landowners, always using illness, death, or military service as cover. "He's a vulture," Carla said, "preys on grief, on absence, on bureaucracy." I also reached out to the new homeowners. Most had no idea the land was stolen. They'd bought in good faith, trusting the developer and the title company. One woman, Sarah Mitchell, lived in the first house built. She'd moved from Chicago, wanted a fresh start after her divorce. "I thought this was a dream," she told me when I knocked on her door. But something felt off. The HOA fees are insane, and the water pressure's terrible. They said it's a temporary issue with the pump station. I almost felt sorry for her, but they were living on my land, in houses built over my family's graves, my dogs, my grandfather's horse, even the old well where my mother used to draw water. No, I wouldn't warn them, they'd find out soon enough. Chapter 7. The plan: I didn't want to hurt anyone, didn't want to kill, but I wanted justice, and I wanted them to feel it. So I planned carefully first. I contacted the Army Corps again. I told them I was reclaiming control of the dam. I asked for a safety inspection. They sent an engineer, Major Elena Ruiz, 2 days later. She was sharp, mid-40s, no nonsense. "You're the operator?" she asked. "I am," I said. "Thomas Macaulay's son." She checked the records, nodded. "Systems, yours. But if you open those gates, you're responsible for downstream impact." "I know," I said, "but the land beneath Whispering Pines is mine. They stole it." She studied me. "There are legal ways to handle this." "Not fast enough," I said, "and not with my father in a care home, unable to fight." She didn't argue. Instead, she ran her own inspection, tested the gates, verified the spillway. Then she said, "If you do this, do it right. Don't kill anyone, but make sure they remember." She left a key in the control panel. "For emergencies," she said. I knew what she meant. Chapter 8. The rain. It started on Friday night, light at first, then steady. By Saturday morning, 2 inches had fallen. The reservoir was now at 96%. I monitored the levels, calculated the pressure, ran simulations in my head. If I opened Gate 3, the main discharge, I could release 8,000 CFS, enough to flood the valley, but not destroy the dam. The spillway would handle it, the houses wouldn't. I waited until Sunday. Whispering Pines was quiet. Cars in driveways, kids riding bikes, a barbecue going in one backyard. I drove to the dam. No one stopped me. I entered the control house. Sat at the panel, pulled up the camera feeds. One showed the entrance to the development. Another showed the Lois house, Langston's own mansion, built right on the floodplain. Perfect. I picked up the radio. "This is the Blackwater Dam Control. This is an emergency water release. All residents in the Whispering Pines development are advised to evacuate immediately. A flood is imminent. I repeat, evacuate now." I didn't expect them to listen. I wasn't sure they could hear me, but I had to say it. Then I turned the wheel. Slowly at first, Gate 3 began to open. A low rumble filled the chamber. Then, with a deep groan, the water surged. I watched the monitors. The river downstream swelled. Within 10 minutes it breached its banks by 20. Water was flowing into the lower yards by 30. Langston's pool was overflowing by 45. The first floor of his house was submerged. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. I felt justice. I stood on the dam's edge and watched. The water moved like a slow beast, rising, swallowing driveways, lawns, gardens. A Tesla floated past, windows cracked. A trampoline bobbed in the current. A child's toy chest drifted by, spilling books, and still, the water rose. Chapter 9. The aftermath of flood didn't destroy everything, but it ruined it. 30-5 homes, all with water damage, foundations cracked, electrical systems fried, mold already forming. No one died. A few injury slips, falls during evacuation, but no fatalities. Langston was pulled from his rooftop by a helicopter. He was screaming. I saw it on the news. "Terrorist attack," he shouted. "Sabotage. The dam was breached." The reporters didn't know